With a new yet controversial design language and some enhancements underneath the surface, does this new smartphone continue the legacy of the Note line? This is Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And this is the Samsung Galaxy Note 5. Perhaps the most important part of the new Galaxy Note 5 is that it feels like we've been here before, and that starts with the design. Though much of the Galaxy design language remains as familiar as ever, the Note line takes on the material choices of the S line, making this the first unibody in the Phablet line. Glass panels are kept together with a metallic frame, and all include the translucent colors that literally make this phone shine and reflect. This also means that this is probably the most fingerprint-prone Note device we've ever seen, which is another trope that derives from the Galaxy S6. The Note 5 manages to be just a bit more than a larger S6 though, as there are subtle curves on the rear sides that actually help with the handling of this big phone. That said, however, much of what we all remember from Samsung devices returns here. The buttons are all where one would expect them, with the fingerprint reader under the home button now being a press type rather than a swipe type. Down on the bottom are all of the ports, a speaker grill, and of course the S Pen nestled very neatly in the bottom right corner. Now the S Pen got some real updates in design, as is evident when you pop out the top. This has to be done in order to actually pull out the entire pen, which does feel and looks sleeker than before. And that click on the top is yet another toy to mess with, and any avid S Pen users will probably take advantage of it in between their thoughts. Okay, yes, we will talk about this somewhat controversy about the S Pen in the Galaxy Note 5. Now, Samsung did unfortunately create it so that the S Pen can be inserted backwards into here, but really, if you're just feeling for the right portion of the pen to insert into this particular slot, then you should be fine. The clicky top part goes last, okay? And as long as you're just wary about it, then you shouldn't have any problems with the S Pen on your Note 5. This new design language in the Note line means one big controversial change. Now, we have the lack of a removable back cover and all that you get underneath it. That means that there are no SD cards or removable batteries available here. Now, those two features have made the Note line the go-to phone for the power user, and that is just not the case anymore. We will explore this notion a little bit more in the hardware section, where our time with the phone reveals pros and cons for these changes. But sacrificing these two features does make for the thinnest, most beautifully constructed Galaxy Note ever. Handling might suffer from a pretty slippery glass design, up until your fingerprints and smudges kind of slow it down. But the Note 5 still manages to have one of the most appealing aesthetics, even if it feels a little too familiar. But familiarity is something that this device can really benefit from, especially when the company has already succeeded in a lot of areas up until now. That starts with the display, which is the same Quad HD performer from last year, again incrementally enhanced for this year's viewers. 2560 by 1440 resolution makes a lot of sense on a larger display, and makes for some really high pixel density in this 5.7-inch display. But what we think is most important about this panel, however, is the really small bezel ratio. There's so little space on the sides, and this really helps for handling. But the high saturation Super AMOLED construction still proves as great as ever, with really high saturation that can still be tweaked down, mind you, and more than adequate viewing in broad daylight. Considering this is a phone that deals in text and writing, the screen really shines, but fire up a colorful game and you'll have just as much joy with it. Performance continues to be a high point for the Galaxy because the in-house processing packages have been optimized for the toned-down TouchWiz. The Exynos 7420 returns from the Galaxy S6, where it really shined, and brings with it 4GB of RAM for some real multitasking, especially considering the S Pen. Now, there's no doubt in our minds that the processor is a great performer, as a whole week with the phone has yet to slow down this phone that we've installed apps, games, trackers, and even have jotted a lot of notes down on. A quick thought on the onboard storage of the Galaxy Note 5 though. As this was the case for the S6, the storage of the Note 5 is UFS 2.0, which is a standard that can rival speeds of solid-state drives. And if the Galaxy S6 was any indication, it does its job in keeping the speed as high as possible in this version of Android. Now, for a lot of people, this might not be a good enough reason to forego expandable storage, but the speed of the Galaxy Note 5 itself kind of makes up for it, especially when you consider that everything in here has been optimized for the overall experience. Again, this might not be enough of a reason for a lot of you out there, but we just thought it was something that should be considered. Nonetheless, the Note 5 does succeed where the Note has always done so, in being the fastest and best iteration of the Galaxy experience in any given year. In hardware, we start off with some of the familiar additions. On the back of the phone, right next to the camera package, the heart rate sensor can be found, and works about as well as ever because the S-Health application has been somewhat streamlined. That said, we know that it is not something everyone will use too often. And every connection is available here, including NFC, that is the main part of the upcoming Samsung Pay ecosystem. Now, phone calls come in loud and clear also, with no dropped calls in my usage on the T-Mobile network. Speaking of audio, the speaker on the bottom benefits from a better placement from before, but provides the expected quality. It does get pretty loud without providing too much body in the sound, but we're glad it doesn't overdo the high ends. Fingerprint reading is a thing of the future, and Samsung makes it work quite well in the Note 5. Setting it up for web signing credentials is also possible, but for the most part, the fingerprinting will be for unlocking the phone. And that is incredibly easy by just waking up the phone with the home button and then leaving your thumb there. In no time, TouchWiz is ready for anything. We've already explored the lack of expandable storage a bit in the performance section, but we will say that the lack of SD card support is a bit of a bummer. While this 32GB version of the phone has yet to run out of space, we do dread the moment that this phone actually does. And finally, in battery, we are dealing with a 3000 mAh unit here that seems a little bit small at first. But in our testing, we found that the Note 5 could still handle the full day of work without any problems, though getting more than that is a bit of a stretch. Screen on time never really got further than 4.5 hours, though standby time is really good, so if the Note 5 is simply laying around most of the time, it can go for a bit more than a day. In keeping the Note as thin as possible, Samsung could only fit this capacity battery in, and then focused on charging it as fast as possible instead. For example, Samsung boasts faster wireless charging on the Note 5, though it is not something that we really take advantage of all the time. It is nice that this phone supports all wireless charging out of the box, but the cordless life that Samsung pondered in their launch event still feels a little far off. Fast charging is probably going to be every user's best friend, as Samsung claims that this is the fastest charging device they've ever put out. Only about 10 to 15 minutes is needed to get the phone back to proper working condition, with just about an hour needed to top off the battery. Now this means that something like a Quick Charge 2.0 portable battery could become an indispensable tool. Even if fast charging feels like a consolation prize to true longevity, there are plenty of 15-minute windows in the day that the Galaxy Note 5 could use, so that power never feels too far out of reach. Samsung continues to bring the quality in the camera department, quite literally too, as the camera on the Note 5 is basically the one from the Galaxy S6. 16 megapixels at f1.9 aperture with 4K video recording in the rear is backed by a 5 megapixel wide-angle front-facing camera. Now by far, the best part about the camera app is the ability to bring it up by just hitting the home button twice, but even then, the app itself is pretty familiar. The manual controls have been given a few more options, namely, being able to change the Kelvin reading in the white balance slider is an addition that wasn't in the S6 camera. There are all the usual modes as well, with everything from slow motion to a new video collage mode that was kind of fun to use. Now live broadcasting is also available with YouTube as the platform, which is basically a periscope built into the camera app. We think it isn't something most users will use, and even then, the established streaming services like Periscope might still take priority. Picture quality remains as great as ever then, keeping Samsung at the top of the heap in Android. Good saturation across the board keeps pictures from ever really being dull, and details are captured really well. Users can benefit from the f1.9 aperture for depth of field effects, and it does help a bit in low light situations where pictures do get the expected level of noise due to higher ISO compensation. But the app does get a little bit slower in low light when trying to focus. Much like the Galaxy S6 proved earlier this year, the great camera experience we already had in the Note 4 could be further improved on, and thus the Note 5 gets all the benefits of this year's evolution in camera quality and performance. And finally, in software, we will focus primarily on the S Pen, though there is a lot offered in this version of TouchWiz as well. The main story is in how streamlined this version of Android has become, as much of what bogged down Samsung's operating system has been stripped away. What remains is actually pretty useful, namely certain gestures and a theme engine that does well to change the look of the interface. Plenty can be found with just a bit of digging, like easy access to the multi-window from the recent app screen, as well as one-handed operation features, easily triggered by hitting the home button 3 times. Just like in the S6, there are far less tutorials and annoying reminders of what the phone can do, which is probably our highlight of this version of TouchWiz. Of course, the additions are mostly in the S Pen, which has been proportionally streamlined with the rest of this operating system. Some features from before have been taken out, prioritizing the most usabilities of the S Pen. Creating memos is easier than ever in the Note 5, as removing the S Pen when the phone is in standby no longer wakes it. Instead, the display remains black and a screen-off memo pad opens up. For any times when the user needs to quickly jot down info like phone numbers, this makes the Note 5 as accessible as a pad of paper in the back pocket. Taking the S Pen out in any other situation, or pressing the button on it opens up the better looking Air Command menu, which now includes a few shortcuts to user-defined apps, though it does feel weird to put anything here that doesn't take advantage of the stylus. The Action Memo is still able to read handwriting and then insert it into a number of different applications with varying degrees of success, but it is still mainly just a way to add to S Note. But in S Note, every note can be pinned to the home screen, as well as made into a reminder, both practical features that make the screen-off memo that much more appealing to use regularly. Smart Select is also as powerful as before, as any portion of the screen can be cut out and very easily shared. For anyone that likes to talk in messaging apps through pictures and memes, like me sometimes, Smart Select is pretty awesome. And finally, there is Screen Write, which takes screenshots of the current workspace for editing and sharing, but now, scrollable pages like web pages can be pieced together automatically by it, creating a long image or note that encompasses everything on the page you want to save. Think long recipes from your favorite Pinterest, for example. What is probably best about the S Pen is that it actually feels a bit more essential than before, and that was achieved by not oversaturating it with buttons or tutorials or even raw features. The list of S Pen abilities is not as long as before, and there are some use case scenarios for every single one of them. And even if you never use the S Pen, it is an addition that proves its worth every time you say, "Why not?" and perform your typical task with it instead. Prices for the Galaxy Note 5 are expectedly high, though the phone was made available just days after the announcement across all major carriers in the West. In total, at least $700 is what you'll shell out to get Samsung's latest outing, whether or not you use payment plans on T-Mobile, AT&T, or elsewhere. It is hard not to look at the Note 5 in comparison to what Samsung has offered in the past, because this year the company decided to take quite a departure in design and hardware choices. The Note 5 might not feel like a power user device anymore, and people who feel that way are completely validated in doing so. For those who expected more, this new iteration feels too much like a Galaxy S6 in terms of what it decides to leave out. But it also succeeds in offering the best that the S6 started, in a bigger and even better package. The stellar display is better at 5.7 inches. The performance is super smooth and reliable for any and all usage levels, and the camera is still one of the best in Android today. Expandable storage and replaceable batteries might be missed, but we were still able to enjoy the Note in spite of all of that. In the Note 5, if we work with what we're given, this phone still delivers. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this review of the Samsung Galaxy Note 5. The Note 5 is still a spectacular device, no doubt about it. It just doesn't really offer the things that we kind of expected it to. Even if our expectations were a little bit high, the impact of the Note 5 just isn't where it was last year with the Note 4, and even before then with the Note 3. But if you spend some time with this new version of the Galaxy Note, we're kind of certain that you'll still pretty much fall in love with it. That being said, however, you could keep it tuned to AndroidAuthority.com for even more explorations into the Note 5, including comparisons between it and all of the flagships currently out right now, and even in the future, as we still have a few more months left, and this upcoming week is IFA in Berlin, and we have a team of 4 heading out to Berlin so we can bring you all of the best coverage that you can find on the internet and on YouTube of the announcements at IFA in Berlin. So keep it tuned to Android Authority for even more, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already so you can keep up with all of that and even more. Once you're done with that, talk about Android in our forums at AndroidAuthority.com, and then stick around for even more, because we are your source for all things Android.